Welcome once again to the High Performance Human podcast. It's your man Andy here, and I am delighted to have. He is a I'll say relatively. He is a very unique individual when you look at his resume. But over the course of this conversation, team, what we're going to discover is that normal people can do extraordinary things. Bretz is a facilitator of transformation and an executive coach. He is the author of an incredible book that I need to make sure that I get a grip of and read right the way through, because I've had a look at Turning Right, which is all about inspiring the magic. And my word, it is an incredible bit of literature that we all need to go and have a bit of a read of. He also helps organizations drive desired cultural shifts and helps leaders to build high-performing teams. And he's also, just casually in his spare time, an ultra marathon runner, and has the absolute honor of having represented Australia in ultra marathon running, completing a 24-hour run and doing 259.67 kilometers in 24 hours, making him the fourth fastest Australian ever, which is pretty phenomenal considering he's a lad that was born in Cologne and just flew over here on a whim. So, look, Kay, it's an absolute pleasure to have you on. And one thing that I will say, team, and you'll discover this during the course of the conversation, I've had a couple of chats with Kay before today, and he is a normal guy who has just worked out how to make the absolute most of himself. And he does it in such a humble way, which is just the best thing ever. So, Kay, a very warm welcome to you. How are things with you in your world?
Thank you so much for having me. And I have to chuckle just listening to you. It's thanks for having me, and all good here. So I'm very excited to just see what we have on offer jointly, to just see how does one get to high performance, because I don't think it's really a secret as such. There's a bit of work involved, as we both know, but it's more of a mindset question of what is possible. So let's tap into that.
Honestly, Kay, this conversation is going to be such an interesting one because, like I mentioned to Clay just before we hit record, one thing that I'm really mindful of, the purpose of this whole podcast is to take high performance off the pedestal and make it more accessible to more people. Right? When we look at your numbers, if we just look at you in black and white, cold, hard facts, Kay, you are not a normal human being. And I say that in the most complimentary way possible. When I did my homework on Kay, team, I'm looking through his stuff and I'm seeing some of the numbers that he's put up with his running, with his career, with his experience, all this sort of stuff. It kind of makes you wonder, right? It makes me go, well, how on earth can a normal person achieve and reach the scale of things that he's done, and the scale of achievements and accomplishments that he's done? But, Kay, just tell us who you are and what you're about, first and foremost, because we need to paint this picture of a guy that isn't like wearing a cape every day.
Yeah. So just one sentence beforehand, which is obviously anybody's resume does typically not include all the failures along the way. So if you had been complete, you would still be talking about all the things which have gone wrong along the way, the races I did not finish, the situations with clients where I've stuffed up. But I'm okay to skip that for today. It's just I just need to say that. So yes, I am very human if you take that other side into account as well. In terms of what floats my boat, I'm really I've always been fascinated by excellence, high performance path to mastery. And I just want to share it with others. So in a way, I take myself as a laboratory and say, okay, let's find out what works, what doesn't work, and I stumble a lot along the way, and then see. I've been in corporate, I've been a McKinsey a consultant in the past, so I somehow know the kind of business world pretty well. But I've learned through sports. Um, First with marathons, then through ultra marathons, then with really long ultra marathons up to 500 kilometers. And in a way, what I'm fascinated by is how do we navigate our challenges? And along the way, who are we becoming? So while in a resume we point out all the kind of great stuff which has worked out, it's really that's somehow a side product, which is nice, which is somehow also helpful to somehow to position oneself. I think we all like success, but the real thing we somehow take away, in my view, is who are we becoming in that process, and and then sharing it and sharing that with others. So I would call myself nowadays a thought leader who has got a thought leader practice. So as you've mentioned, I'm an author, I'm a coach, I'm a facilitator, I'm a speaker, and in those different formats, I work with pretty much with leaders and see how do we step up to another level. And the principles I've learned a lot through sports, but I've learned them as well through corporate, through consulting, through through life, and I keep learning. So I'm in a way always a student along the path myself.
I love how you refer to yourself as your own laboratory. I love that. That you learn by trying, you learn by testing, you learn by giving stuff a go, and then finding out for yourself through your own experiences what tends to work well and what tends to not work well. I really like that, and I'm going to dig into that in a little bit for sure. Now, Kay, we always ask this question of all of our guests. I have this belief that high performance is defined and has four key elements to it, being success, connection, influence, and happiness. Really intrigued to find out what your definition of a high performance human is.
I like yours, I have to say. I need to contemplate that a little bit more. Um, Probably I'll go through a different door into the same room. So for me, it's a matter of consciousness, and we can tap into that a little bit more. But it's a state of being that allows us to tap into the most desirable state in any given situation. So if I expand on that, it's very easy to somehow get sidetracked by challenges and get into a state where we do not want to stuff up, a kind of motivation not to fail. And that is very often a default of, we contract, we can't really be at our best. And the high performing human in my world can stay expanded and can stay still tapping into that abundance which is out there, and be motivated to succeed. And straddling between those two kind of mindsets, the high performing human just is a little bit more on the kind of motivation to succeed side. So if I repeat my definition, it's that tapping into the state of consciousness that is most desirable in any situation.
That is, I knew that you were going to come up with a different answer. And it's not because you're German, right? Because Germans tend to think about things a little bit more pragmatically and systemically and whatnot. But I love that you are the first, actually, guest that's talked about tapping into a state of consciousness. And that's something that I really want to dig into. Now, you mentioned there how a lot of people tend to operate out of fear as opposed to success from a motivational point of view. I think, it's been proven across several studies that a lot of the time we tend to be a lot quicker to action when we fear something going wrong. Right. So go back to cavemen, and, they operate their entire lives through fear, because if they don't, they die. Right. But you're suggesting that these days, a true high performance human, and it relates to the happiness component, I get this. But one big thing that a lot of people really tend to struggle with that prevents them inherently from going one step towards where they would love their lives to be is that intrinsic internal motivation, because they would love to have that. But while there's no fear of what is being lost or what could be lost, or, they tend to slip on their own internal motivation around those sorts of things, which is crap from a human. But, you'd love for it to be the other way around, right? You'd love for it to be or equal, shall we say. So let's dig into that first and foremost, because in your experiences, and we were just talking before, team. So Kay, casually on the weekend just gone, just casually did a marathon in Ballarat, Victoria, which is down here in Australia, and recorded his best marathon time that he has done in the last 8 years. And you mentioned to me that you attributed that to the fact that you were the happiest person on the course. Now,
Yeah.
how, up until that point, obviously you would have had different motivations, you would have had different mindsets for different tasks and different competitions and so on and so forth. Why is it that you have attributed that most recent sort of personal success to the fact that you were the happiest guy on the course, as opposed to worrying about losing or worrying about missing out on a time or whatever the case may be?
So, we all know that rather than focusing on outcomes, it's helpful just to focus on process, which gets us to outcomes. So far, I think almost everybody knows it. It's not easy. And I think it's not easy because process itself can somehow hide still our motivation to just really not to fail. So we say we have to do what we have to do in order to run a good marathon, for example. So what helps me staying in process is going one step further and saying it's not about the process, it's actually about the energy I'm displaying. So back to that level of consciousness. And if I go into a race, and I just tried it in this one, and say, I'm not trying to kid myself that I don't want to do well, because obviously I want to do well. But I'm really focusing. The one thing which is in my control is if I go out there and say I'm the happiest person on the course, I'm actually in the right mindset. That is the mindset I want to be in. Then the process somehow follows, and let's see what kind of results comes out of that. And surprisingly, well, not really surprisingly, I probably would not have been any faster trying to do well. I would have been slower than that because I was just relaxed. I was completely in flow. I was encouraging other people who were somehow fading right and left to me. And and it just all fell into place. So it is that question of how do we tap into be motivated to succeed, and very practically, be happy.
And I love the fact that you've said the word practically there, because for a lot of people, they're hearing that and it can head into the sort of kumbaya, burning incense around a campfire sort of world, right? Which a lot of people don't relate to. Some people do, but a heck of a lot of people don't, because they live in the real world, according to them, right? They live in the real world as they see it. And by just saying, right, today I'm going to be the happiest guy on the course, they really struggle to make that connection. Well, hold on. Just by saying that, you went 2 hours and 52. Like, just by saying that, that's bullshit, right? I'm calling BS on that.
Yeah.
Now, you talk about the difficulty of tapping into your consciousness and creating a consciousness that becomes a lot more productive, right?
Yeah.
If we're to keep it in a world of practicality.
Yeah.
In your experience, what have been the real hurdles to entry, the real barriers to entry when it comes to creating a consciousness that can be productive as opposed to fearful? What have been the real barriers to entry that you found?
Yeah. It's slipping back into that outcome thinking I referred to early on. So Let's
Mm.
let's let's go practically at this. Let's go together to the start line of the marathon. The start goes off. So the gun goes off. We're running. There are hundreds and actually there are thousands of people. Some are overtaking me. So I'm overtaking others. And within a split second, that kind of competitive instinct comes out. Obviously, I mean I've trained and I'm there with the intention to be the happiest person. And within a few split seconds, I'm there to do well. We all want to do that. So that's and that's the first warning sign of saying, okay, do we throw that overboard, or are we somehow capable of really sticking to our mission, which is I'm here to be happy. So how do we first settle into it? And that kind of settling in is something one can train during the preparation process of saying, well, I'm going out there, I've got smaller races, might be 5K races, might be whatever, even runs with friends. Focus on settling in. And so I do a lot of meditation, which I think helps to focus and to settle in. One doesn't have to do that. To your point, it's not everybody's cup of tea, but it helps in terms of grounding oneself. Then let's go a few kilometers further in the race. And I notice, oh, I'm already looking at my split times, and the thought comes in, well, how fast will I be towards the end? So I'm back in outcome thinking. So I'm not saying it doesn't happen to me. What I'm basically saying is, I think that's automatic, but does it run away with us? So are we in that motivation not to fail and set somehow an expectation and anything else is somehow failure? Or do we notice it? Is there something aware that that part is active and we can choose, really important word, we choose not to go down that route, but we say, well, we're here, genuinely here to be the happiest person on the course. And look how beautiful those kind of big trees are. Look at those autumn leaves. Look at somehow I'm here and I've trained so hard to be here. And now I'm just having some fun. That doesn't mean I let go of somehow running fast. No, some of the enjoyment is just getting into flow and doing well. That is part of it, but it's not the thing which is running the show anymore. So a few things maybe in there which happy to unpick further.
So, yeah, there's a couple of bits in there. Now, one of the first things that sort of sprung to mind before was the word choose. And I'm really glad that you highlighted the word choose. When I was in my bartending life, bar management life, when I came across this fish philosophy, and it was the Seattle Pike Mike's Pike Place, and they build this fish philosophy, and one of the four philosophies in that is to choose your attitude. Okay, when you turn up to work, you're there. So what are you going to do? Like, you can choose to be miserable, or you can choose to be cool. You can choose to be happy. Either way, you're going to be there. So which of those realities would you rather have? Now, this is something that is lost, and it's lost on me. Okay, I'm sure it gets lost on you sometimes as well. Mm-hmm. When you're like, I would much rather be anywhere else right now, right? But the reality, and this is the absolute statement of fact, is you are where you are, and there's nothing you can do to change it. So when we talk about choosing our attitude, and we relate that to the consciousness that we bring into any task that we have, unpack that bit a little bit for us, because like I said, and especially, with some of the tests that you put yourself up for, I'm sure there would have been multiple times within the one test where you're like, nah, screw this. This is no good. I'm not having it. So unpack that bit for us a little bit, and maybe bring in one or two things where you've doubted yourself, and you've really questioned your choice.
So in terms of choosing, I like what you've just been saying. So the consciousness, let's just give it two different types of consciousness. The not choosing part, so the reactive part, would be a to me consciousness. So I'm the victim. Things are happening to me. the circumstances are bad, the race is going well, the weather isn't there. It's all happening to me. And that's the kind of reactivity when we are run by our surrounding. And we don't have choice when we're in there. We're just a pawn in the game. The one we are just talking about, the choosing part, is stepping up one level higher of consciousness, which is the by me consciousness. It's I am in charge. That doesn't mean I have full control over everything. I still can't choose what the weather will be. I can't choose what my result will be. That's not the choice. But the choice I have, and this is really, really important, the choice is how do I relate to any given moment? That is my choice. So let's say, and examples, a race goes not to plan. So last year I had a really big race, which I wanted to do very well. And I was well on track. It was a 330-ish, maybe 340-kilometer race. And I wasn't halfway, but I was way in front several hours, and I got lost. And the getting lost was it was unfortunate. The map was incorrect. The course marking wasn't really right. And I ended up in bushes in the middle of the night, in snake territory. I mean, we're in Australia, and there's not a lot of friendly stuff out there at night. So it's very hostile. And I found myself confined in less than a square meter. I couldn't move anymore. So I was really lost and would have blamed everything on the circumstances, because it somewhat wasn't fair if we come from a to me consciousness. It's the map was wrong, the marking wasn't right, it was unfortunate, and I was done too. That's one way you could look at it. Or you can just say, I still don't like it. I mean, I did not like it. It's what's the best I can do now? How do I relate to this? What is the next move I'm making? And you mentioned speeding up beforehand, like our mind easily speeds up when we're under pressure. And that's what I noticed my mind was doing. And I also knew in that moment that now speeding up mentally would not serve me. It doesn't solve anything. You're just wasting energy. I mean, that's how most people going into swimming, most people who drown don't drown because they're not good swimmers. They drown because they panic. And so it's a very dangerous thing to panic in such situations. And I perceive that as a survival situation. But in a way, I was curious. Now I'm here. I might as well somehow make the best out of the situation I'm in. So I assessed my options. I pressed an SOS button in my tracker, which had a GPS device. I knew what had to trust that some help would be on its way. It took them more than 2 hours to find me and to eventually get me out of there. So there's a long time to think. But what I'm saying is, how do we relate to a situation does not mean it's the result we want. It does not mean that it is actually going to be nice and pretty. And long story short, that particular race, although I tried to get moving again afterwards, my race was done, and 4 or 5 hours later, I had to pull out because I was mentally so depleted. Although I did everything somewhat right, I was mentally so depleted because it was a survival situation that I called it a day. I couldn't keep on going for another 40 hours. And I have to say that was the best decision I made, because it wasn't my race. And for me, that race was not about finishing. Unfortunately, it was about some kind of different kind of growth. And that's the framing, which is also our choice. What do we get out of it?
What a cool story. Scary, but cool. I like it how you I like how you just casually said there's not a lot of friendly stuff at night. No, that's quite correct. But one thing that really stood out for me then was your process in which you managed to stay in the sort of more proactive state of consciousness, right? And the one thing that you said there very quickly, but it's really worth highlighting, team, really worth highlighting for your notes, is accepting what is. So the pivotal part of Kay's story just then was that He could either have gone into reactive consciousness, where it's all, poor me, or, and this is what he did, he accepted that where he was shit. He shouldn't have been there. He didn't want to be there. And he was miles ahead, and his race is pretty much balls up from there, right? But he accepted it. And by accepting his reality, it allowed him to then go into that more proactive state of consciousness of making the most out of that situation or that particular set of circumstances that he found himself in. That bit for me is a little nugget of gold there, Tim. I can relate to that from my experiences, not because I've run ultra marathons regularly, clearly, but when my old man passed away, I could either, really bemoan the fact that he's dead and all this sort of stuff, or I can accept his death as a situation that has happened that I cannot change. And what that did for me was it actually instantly created a sense of gratitude for the dad I had, as opposed to the bloke I lost. Right. And by accepting the situation, accepting the fact that my old man, Big Jim, had passed away, I instantly allowed myself the freedom in my mind to be able to see the great things that came from being his son, as opposed to lamenting what I had lost. That's that momentary pivotal bit of your lives where you have before the choice, you have an acceptance, and then the choice becomes a lot healthier, for want of a better word, right? I love that. I really, really like that. Now, I also the human.
Sorry, Andy. May I just? This might be a good moment just to link it back to one of your first questions of the high-performing human, because at that stage my definition might have been a bit theoretical, and now with these stories it really comes to life. So if I say the high-performing human is one who can somehow, in any given circumstance, choose the most desirable consciousness state of mind to be in. This is exactly it. It's both true in the moment of getting lost in the Australian bushland. It's not the situation is desirable, but the state of mind is the most desirable to be in. And I'm not saying that's easy. It takes a lot of practice to get there. The same with your father passing away. It's also not a desirable situation. So the circumstances are not what you want, but it's being at choice of how you relate to them. And then there is an abundance, and there's somewhat staying open. Like you mentioned, gratitude, that's abundance. And somehow so much more is possible than closing down and everything becoming reactive. So I'm aware I've just repeated what we said earlier, but this is really what we're talking about. That's the high performance part.
Absolutely right. I couldn't agree more. Now, it does open up a question, right? Because accepting that the circumstances are pretty bang average requires a sense of vulnerability or humility, two potential words that you could pin to that one, right? But for a lot of people, accepting the situation for what it is can be a huge bridge to gap in itself, whether it is through fear of public judgment or fear of internal judgment. For a lot of people, that are at the depths of despair, or they've allowed a certain addiction to really get a grip of them, for example, that first step of acceptance of the circumstances that they find themselves in can be very, very challenging, that in itself. How would you suggest can be the very first baby steps for some of these people? Because for a lot of people that we're talking to, for a lot of people that were on the podcast, listening to the podcast, accepting their current circumstances as is can be something that could permanently prevent them from tapping into an abundance that could be for them, right? So from a baby steps point of view, in your experience, Kay, just in that one instance of accepting what is, what can be one or two things that people can be aware of or can become aware of? Because like we both said, it's not easy. So how did you build that strength within you?
The slowing down is probably the key part of the answer, which in itself is not, it's counterintuitive. So the moment we are triggered, adrenaline, cortisol, it will make us speed up. And once we really speed up, we're gone. Like there is not a lot of, there's no agency left in a way. And that is very strong chemicals which are out there for I don't know how many hundreds of thousands or millions of years, even before humans. They're very effective and they know what they are doing. So they run the show for good reasons. Survival, you were talking about the caveman beforehand. How do we slow down in the moment everything wants to speed up? Because slowing down allows us to take a slightly different perspective. So the speeding up gets us into that poor me to me, like I'm the victim. That's the speeding up process. And if we manage to slow down, so take a breath, just don't instantly do anything. Just take a breath and do nothing. As an example, let's take a tactical timeout. It's what they do in sports. If you have in basketball, you can take timeouts. Take a timeout in that moment, buy yourself some time, and then it allows us potentially to be on the balcony watching some of the theater play out in front of us. So otherwise, we are just on the dance floor and we are somehow on the stage and acting out some our tragedy. That's what's happening. If we're on the balcony, if we're somehow in the audience at the same time looking at us, we eventually get to choice. I mean, I'm in the cinema and I have the perspective of, yeah, that actor and that kind of movie, it feels really real. That's a good movie. It feels real. It's all tense and whatever the movie might be. But I also know I'm a spectator. And I also might say, yeah, but why is this actor not doing X, Y, and Z? Because I've got a different perspective than the actor is playing out. And we can do that with ourselves. So me sitting here, looking at you, I'm obviously talking and I can somehow act out Kai Bretz. That's all I can do. And simultaneously, I can have the balcony view and say, I see myself, I feel myself. I notice maybe early on at the beginning, there was a little bit of nervousness. Now I feel more settled, but I'm somehow aware of the bigger picture. And that gives me choice, which if I'm somehow just running along with cortisol and adrenaline, I don't have choice. So slowing down is probably my answer. I would like to log in, Eddie.
I like that. Taking a deep breath is one thing. I think one thing that we also need to do, and I've mentioned this on in one or two conversations, is making what we feel is reality, what we think, what we see as reality, actually putting that into a context that allows us to see the reality. Okay, because our perception of reality isn't necessarily reality, right? One thing that I've found to be tremendously useful on the odd occasion where I've been struggling with this and what have you is to write down the physical, the tangible realities that are in existence. The things that are undeniable, they are 100% statement of facts. You write down the statements of facts as to what your situation entails, not your perception of them, not your opinion of them, not your emotions around them, the statements of facts that define your situation. So, for example, if you are stuck in a dead-end job, again, I've no doubt that plenty of us have been in jobs where we just feel it's like Groundhog Day, or it's not aligned with what we really want to do, what we're really passionate about, all the rest of it. But we feel that we're stuck. Writing out the practicalities of your situation and then doing exactly what Kay said, and just stepping back for a second and taking a deep breath allows you to take almost the German efficiency approach to it and to see it for the reality that it actually is.
Yeah.
If you see it for the reality that it actually is, then it allows you to perhaps tap into a different bit of your brain that is completely shut off by the emotions that you have around those set realities. And I found, Kay, that to be a tremendously practical way of doing a step-by-step sort of process in helping me to accept the reality for what it is. Because, it's that age-old saying, right? We can only control what we can control. And I love that your assessment, when we go back to your stuck in the bush analogy, I love that you saw and you heard and you recognized the poor me part. The fact that you recognized it creeping in, and you probably did shout out a couple of expletives and all the rest of it. And shit, I would have as well when it dawned on me that yes, there probably is a couple of Sammy snakes kicking around and whatnot. And being as Johnny Foreigner as you, my friend, anything that creeps or crawls is not ideal. So for someone who has achieved what you've achieved, it's safe to say that I think in that initial instance, there would be that flash of poor me, right? And it's okay for that, is it not?
Absolutely. It's what I'm hearing from you. I'll just put it into my own words. Is to accept any given situation as it is, which is it's difficult, but it's only difficult because we try to accept both the facts and the story at the same time. So there's any situation has facts, as you said. You called it the true reality. It's like there's no argument around it. And then there is the imagined reality, which is some of the story we spin around it. So, for example, I will fail. I will never be good enough. This year everybody will laugh at me, and I've put all this work in and I come home empty-handed. So there's a huge story, and it's extremely difficult accepting I'm in the bush, that is the fact, and all the kind of consequences which I attribute to that situation. But what you are saying is that is my story. That's not the fact. That's a story which may or may not be true. And it's accepting that is almost impossible for lots of us, including for myself. So when we manage to split those two, so in a way, same thing for when lots of people ask me, well, running up to 500 kilometers, how do you deal with the pain? It's the same thing. There's a reality, which is pain. And yes, it can be painful. But pain typically isn't too bad. And I'm curious, I mean, you in your fighting world would know that pain is only the reality. And then there comes the suffering, which we attribute on top of the pain, which is all the kind of negative stuff of because of that, I can't do X, Y, and Z. But that's the suffering which is optional. It's not what is happening. It's something which we spin on top of what is happening. And digesting everything at once is too much. So we can't accept it. And then we get into the poor me consciousness. And we can't really deal with a situation. We don't navigate the challenge well. Whereas if we split those two, don't eat the entire elephant, just deal with the pain, don't deal with the suffering. Deal with being lost, don't deal with all the kind of consequences which I create in my mind. And then, that's the real kicker. Then we are more effective in the situation. And the outcomes will be so much better then if we somehow now all lock ourselves down and somehow make ourselves small and contract and maybe, I mean, it's common and it's easy to then say, oh, now I'm cheating, or now I'm pretending I did well or whatever. No, it's like stick to the facts and say this was not the race I wanted to have, and take it as water for the mill to be better next time, because there's something in there which makes us a better athlete. Maybe it helps us to become better at our job, to be a better human. And that's what I said before, and it's what really excites me. It's the growth we're getting through it. You can't buy that. You can't go to the shop and say, I want to somehow upgrade my operating system. No, you have to go through those really shitty moments. And it's those shitty moments which make us better.
Now, I want to take a slight. I mean, FYI, team, that should be something that you need to put in your notes in a big, big way. We try to process the reality and the story at the same time. That is really quite profound, actually, when you think about that, because that's exactly what we do. Okay, you're absolutely spot on. That is exactly what we do. We try and process the stuff while processing our emotions around the stuff at exactly the same time. That's actually fairly huge, team. If you are in one of these situations where you want to do better for yourself, for others, for your family, you want to get a greater sense of satisfaction, half the battle is the fact that we're trying to process our current tangible situation, whether it's golden handcuffs, whether it is job, whether it is kids, whether it is whatever, the stuff, whilst at the same time trying to process our story, our narrative around those things. If we can split them, geez, Kay, this is massive, man. If we can split these two things and assess them individually, then it gives us a much better shot of creating a proactive consciousness, or a conscious consciousness that allows us to move forward to some degree. I love that. That is massive. That is huge. I want to take a bit of a right-hand turn. When you're in the middle of one of these ridiculous runs, right, that you for some reason think is a good idea, now, what are the sort of habits and the things that you've processed and the things that you have learned along the way that have helped you to stay the course? Because I relate your ultra, mega, super duper, superhuman marathons. I relate that to, when you talk about process, because you've mentioned the word process quite a lot, but anybody can take the story of your ultra marathons and then apply it to a simple process of starting a business, or the simple process of building something, or the simple process of getting fit, or whatever the case may be. And we always keep banging on about consistency and all this sort of stuff, when you've got a very practical example. Because for you, consistency is left foot, right foot a whole bunch of times, right? And what are the things that you've learned along the way in your trip so far that have allowed you to stay consistent in your actions? Because you talk about discipline, right? I mean, wow. I mean, the discipline that you have within your own headspace must be incredible. So what are the things that you've done? I mean, you've mentioned meditation, but how do you stay the course?
So I might be coming, you're right, I might be coming from the discipline angle, but that didn't give me a real head start. It was just, again, the door I came through first, and then I had to learn the agility part. Some other people are way better at agility, and they might have to learn the discipline part. Once you have both, I think that's a real strong combination. So it's not about the race, it's about the preparation first. And in the preparation, one needs to define the problem holistically. It's very easy to say, oh, I've got a 500-kilometer race, do a lot of running. Oh, no, no. I mean, obviously one needs the fitness, but, and that's the big but, and that's the transferable bit. We tend to somehow fall short when we just go for the obvious and say, let's do and prepare what is obvious. For such kind of races and any challenge we're facing, there are many, many more things which one needs to take care of. So I'm taking care of nutrition, of how do I recover afterwards? What kind of gear am I wearing? What is my process at an aid station? So let's make sure I actually know what the process is, so I'm not wasting any time there. Of what do I unload, what do I onboard? It's making sure the process that when it's hot and sunny, I apply sunscreen, because when you're out there for 3 days in a row and don't put sunscreen on, well, you can be the best runner in the world and you will somewhat tap out sooner or later because you're sunburned. And it's those little things which can absolutely kill your race and have nothing to do with the fitness everybody's thinking about. So what I'm saying is have the discipline beforehand to think of anything which somehow is relevant. And I'm extremely surprised by some runners who are way better than I am, who actually don't do what it takes, and then I end up, as you say, I feel I'm very, very normal in terms of my abilities. I just do the things other people don't do, and therefore can overtake other people who we might call more talented. So do the things which we know they will somehow be asked of us. And that then, during the event, during the challenge, gives us a headspace to be very agile with the things which will come unexpectedly. There's always stuff which comes unexpectedly. And those things in the past, I was not good at that agility. So I was thrown by whatever got thrown at, stuff got thrown at me. And it was belly up very, very often, because I somehow then went into that poor me consciousness of saying, yeah, but this is not fair. This shouldn't have happened. Yeah, it doesn't matter. It's like expect the unexpected, which is another step everybody can do of how do we accept any situation. Expect that you get lost. I mean, don't be surprised. You will get lost sooner or later. Expect that there's a thunderstorm. Expect whatever it might be. Expect that something goes wrong somewhere. The aid station you expected is not there, which means you don't get the food, you don't get the drinks, and have another 2-3 hours to go. Well, what is then? Then we have the agility to deal with that in the situation. And it doesn't mean that it's pretty. It doesn't mean we like it. And it doesn't mean we necessarily even make it through it, but we stay at choice, back to what we said beforehand, because we have discipline and agility.
I really like this train of thought, team. Preparing for anything that could come your way. So say, for example, if we were to relate this into a starting of a new business, for example, right? But your reality, the facts of your reality are that you have a mortgage, you have kids, you have responsibilities outside of yourself, okay? To bring Kay's tremendous example into a sort of real world sort of situation like that, it could be the case. It could be a case of preparing yourself for when you are time poor because one of your kids is sick, for example. It could be a case of a curveball being, what if your resources are starting to become really limited financially? It could be an unforeseen bill or a new competitor that's doing something really similar. Now, it might not alter how you do things yourself. It might not alter how you operate, but it can most certainly influence that state of consciousness. So what Kay's mentioned there is the fact that he accepts that there are players, there are runners that are perhaps, naturally a little bit more gifted than he is from a running point of view, from the physical running side of things. But the thing that makes Kay as effective as he is when it comes to that field is the fact that he puts thought into any of these curveballs that could come his way. And off the back of that, just having a sense of having played it through in your mind, the way that you then react to those things is likely to be a lot more calm. When Case talked about the world speeding up, when something hits you or a curveball hits you, and then the world speeds up and you tend to speed up with it. What he mentioned there about slowing down, it's not a case of slowing down in the moment. It's a case of preparing yourself so that you can process things a lot better, preventing them from speeding up when they happen in the moment. Is that right? Is that a fair assumption, fair summation?
That's exactly it. It's being, I like this, it's being prepared for these curveballs to happen, which means there is less speeding up. So that's probably one advantage of my world speeds up less often. And when it does speed up, I also have the capacity for it without throwing out the baby with the bathwater. So a really interesting, just a quick anecdote. In my first 350K race, which was non-stop, I raced it for 68 hours or so with 2 hours of sleep. And my process was spot on even 69 hours in or 68 hours in. So it did not deviate. My quality of decision making did not deviate. And one of the spectators at one of the aid stations came to me after the race and said, Kai, I have noticed what the difference between the front of the pack, she was looking at me, versus somehow middle and back of the pack is. It's actually not that they are better runners than the others, but when things don't go to plan, they still do what it takes. And she was referring to, they still put on the sunscreen, they still drink, although they don't feel like drinking, they still eat, although they don't feel like eating, they still stop. And when they have a blister, they make the time to actually attend to those blisters. It's all those little things which then allow them to keep moving at a completely different speed than the back of the pack. And that's, in other words, exactly what we're talking about, is not speeding up, not throwing out some of the discipline and the process. And with whatever happens, there's a bit more capacity to deal with it. And we're coming back to happiness, which is one of your criteria or joy criteria of high performance. It's even when things go completely wrong. So in my case, it's a did not finish race. And I don't like them. I'm not directly questioning my identity and it's like, it's the end of the world. Yeah, it's painful. Absolutely. So I'm not kidding myself. But it's not like my identity is at threat and therefore I will never ever be good again. It's, yeah, this is a stepping stone which sometime in the future will somehow bear its fruits of this painful situation, will lead to something good somewhere if I choose it, if I allow it to be.
I love that. I think that is just is such a good way to bring this conversation to a head, team, because I think for so many of us, right, for so many of us, when we are faced with a level of adversity, or if something that we really wanted to have happen doesn't happen, we can very, very quickly define ourselves by that failure, right? Or define ourselves by that particular outcome, thus preventing us from wanting to give something else another go, or try something different, or try the same thing but with a different approach, because we get so hung up on the outcome. And this has been the theme through a lot of this conversation, team, which you should have in your notes. The outcome is not what defines us. It's the process that contributes towards what we ultimately end up becoming. That bit is absolute gold all in itself. And Kay, like, it's been such a joy to have you on this podcast because, yes, you've done some incredible, insane. Like when I first met him, guys, I actually said, you've either got a screw loose or you've got something different in your DNA, one or the other. But what we're discovering in this conversation today, gang, is that Kay is a normal guy. He just chooses to prepare himself for any potential outcome so that he knows that when he goes and steps over that whitewash at the start of the race, he's at least happy in himself that he's prepared himself for whatever could come. And then whatever the outcome is, the outcome is. But he's never going to let himself be defined by that outcome. That's tremendous. I love that. That is so good, man. I'm so grateful that you've come onto this show. I really, really am, Kay. It's been an absolute pleasure. Now, we do have one final question, though, my man. One final question. In your journey towards whatever your definition of high performance is for you, for Kay Bretz, if there was one thing missing from your game that you need to work on, that you either need assistance with, or that is something that could be an Achilles heel, what do you think it is?
It's interesting. We've talked a lot through this time together about how I deal with failure and with the challenges. And I would say I'm pretty good at that, and I'm not trying to do that in an arrogant way. Where I struggle most is dealing with extreme success. So what happens through this process is, throughout my running career and life, I have some peak performance highlights. So take the World Championships, where I completely outperformed my own expectations, anybody's expectation. I came 11th, and it was just wow. There was another race where I smashed the course record by 5 hours. Wow, how can you do that? And then, really surprisingly, because it's so out there, it's beyond anything I'm used to, for several years, and I'm talking years now, I tend to be chasing that experience and trying to replicate it. And I know that that's what I'm doing. And it's obviously not working. I can tell you it's not working. And so it's the kind of that time to integrate those big successes takes me a very long time. So I'm not really good learning from the big successes of, okay, how do I take that and make it part of my toolkit? It takes some years. And yeah, whereas from failure, I straight away put it into my toolkit, and then I move on, and it actually helps me. So
Right.
yeah, that's probably the key thing. World Championships, the last one were 5 years ago now. And I feel like I'm slowly finding my feet again on just saying, okay, I am where I'm at, and I'm not at that level right now, but I might get to that or surpass it, but I'm okay with where I'm at right now.
What an interesting thing to sort of, but I can understand it, right? I mean, they say comparison is the thief of joy. And when you're comparing yourself to yourself, that could be I can understand where that could be a bit of a vicious circle, because, and I think when we all think about this team, when we contemplate after listening to this awesome human, we've all had those sort of situations as well, where we've had a moment of brilliance or a moment where we felt absolutely euphoric in our happiness. And it might not be something that you've achieved or accomplished or whatever. It could be, the joy of, giving birth to your first child, for example, right? That instant moment of joy is then buried in shit. I am now a parent, How do I do this? This thing is totally dependent on me. Da 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 da. And then we start to get really doubtful as to our capabilities as a human and as parents, because we're like, why aren't we as happy as that first moment? Like, why aren't we feeling this euphoric state of joy as we first experienced when this thing came into our lives in the first place? You know, the practical realities of the fact that that is one moment of absolute joy. But we always try and define the rest of our parenthood to that standard of joy, right? Massive, massive. You know what? And the fact that you recognize that is amazing. But I think we could all recognize that in ourselves in one element of our lives or another. And maybe by doing what Kay said, taking a deep breath for a minute and seeing it for the practicality that it actually is, it might allow us to feel that little bit more joy in where we are at currently. Kay, Bretz, I'll tell you what, man, I could talk to you for hours and I would be absolutely happy in hour 5 not just in hour 1. It would be so, so good to have you back on this podcast at some stage, my man, because the way that you attack life and the way that you articulate your experiences is something that I'm super grateful to have experienced. So thank you so much for joining us on this show. It's been an absolute pleasure.
So on my side, and let's make it happen. So see you at some point again.
All right, team. I'm absolutely certain that you would have got a stack full of notes. I'm telling you now, I'm going straight back through this recording and having another listen because some of the stuff that Kay's come out with and some of the things that have come out of our conversation are real profound, could help you make a real critical change or turn in your existence that can take you that one step closer towards your definition of being a high performance human. Until then, though, team, stay safe, stay healthy, stay happy. We'll catch you on the next episode. Take care.